One. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Tom and Amelia.
Yep. So we're here to bring you the gospel word for, well, this is a lectionary for Sunday, May 9th. But it's a good word for any day of the week, any time of the year. It's a wonderful passage following up on the one we did last week from John 15. This is verses 9 to 17. So we'll start as
The
always.
vine and the branches.
That's what we did last time.
Right.
This one's love one another. Very appropriate for Mother's Day, I guess. So,
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Which is that Sunday. Okay. So Tom's going to tell us the story.
So Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I keep my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I've said these things to you that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, because a servant doesn't know what his master is doing. But I've called you friends, because everything that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed and ordained you, that you might go and bear much fruit, fruit that will abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will do it for you. And these are my commands. Love one another."
Thank you, Tom. That was a pretty clear message, not too subtle, I guess, in there. Yeah. It's interesting. It's when you started talking, you said this was Jesus talking to his disciples. But sort of the impact, listening to you tell it rather than read it, especially, was that it was more like Jesus was, through you, I guess, was talking to me personally. Is that a dynamic that you think is intended or is common?
Yeah. It's one of the dynamics of storytelling and audience address, that rather than these being read about someone else, as a storyteller, I'm addressing and looking directly at you as the audience. And so I'm Jesus and you're the disciples, but it's addressed to you as a disciple. So yeah, that's dynamic of audience address and storytelling.
Great. Okay, so another question is around translation. You told me you made a few changes in the script, so to speak.
Yeah.
I know sometimes people are really, they're real nervous. Oh, is it okay if I make a change or whatever? And usually, often when we tell, there are some changes just because of the way the memory works, or in some cases doesn't work. But yours, I think your changes were more intentional. So why don't you talk a little bit about the kinds of changes you made and why you made them?
Yeah, well, the biggest one is at the end. The NRSV is, let's see, I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another. And the verb there, love, may love one another, can be the same word in Greek, can be both subjunctive, that you may love one another, and an imperative, love one another. And I think that this is Jesus saying directly, these things I command you, love one another. And that fewer words have more impact than this longer thing that's in the NRSV. There's also, I made, 2 or 3 places. I translated it in the word order that's in the Greek, and interestingly, in the King James that got changed.
It got changed in the NRSV.
In the NRSV, yeah.
Yeah, okay, kind of made it more contemporary sort of sounding.
Well, I don't know why, actually.
Okay.
So one is the NRSV has, no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Well, the Greek order is greater love has no one than this. And so there's more emphasis given then to greater love. And
is that the way the King James has it?
That's the way the King James has it. And that's the way that the Greek reads.
Yeah.
So often the King James is closer to the word order of the Greek than the NRSV.
Huh.
And more often than not, I think the Greek word order is better and is more emphatic, and that it was translated to be heard, whereas the NRSV is translated to be read in silence.
Right. One of the kinds of changes that you've made, I think you said you did this, was not going with the King James, and that was with regard to more inclusive language.
Yeah, well, that's the King James translates, greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. And, that makes it gender specific, whereas if it's gender inclusive, as I've translated, greater love has no one than this, that one would lay down one's life for one's friends.
Yeah.
So, that then is not addressed only to men,
Right.
but includes women.
Yeah. Right. One of the things that this makes us mindful is that these differences in translation, I mean, they are translations. So only if we want to be speaking ancient Greek would we not be making decisions about what words to use.
Right.
So there's a range of interpretation, a range of translating, and sometimes we think about why we would do it one way or another. And it does help to then have access to somebody who does can read and understand original Greek, so that you make those decisions based on, honoring the original language and not just on whatever you happen to feel like doing at the moment.
Right. Right. And it's also not reading the Greek in silence, but reading it aloud as it was intended to be experienced. And so that difference between translating for sound, both listening and then translating, is different than what happens with a lot of contemporary translations, which is that they're based on the assumption of a text with a reader who is not, so that sound is not involved. Well, that's a major change. And so I think it is always better to base the translation on the Greek as it is heard, rather than read in silence.
Right. Good. Thank you. Okay. In this passage, Jesus is issuing commands, and it ends with this very strong command to love one another. This is John, and we know John differs quite a lot from the synoptics. What's the nature of any commands that Jesus gives or affirms in the synoptic gospels? Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Well, there's the story of the scribe who asks, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, this is first. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There isn't in any of those stories this direct command that is addressed to the listeners as disciples. So this is John making this emphatic and addressed directly as an imperative rather than as a description of what's in this case, Exodus.
That makes me think of another question, which probably you can't answer. You'd probably have to get inside Jesus's head, which we really can't do to answer this. But so he's talking to his disciples, he's telling them to love one another. Do you think he meant to only that they should love each other, or were they supposed to love those who weren't disciples?
Yeah. Well, in this instance, he is talking to his friends for the last time. And so he is thinking about what their condition is going to be when he's gone. And so his commandment to love one another is then also a reflection of both what he saw as a possibility, namely that they wouldn't love one another, but would be in conflict, which is obviously what's happened with a lot of Jesus' disciples. But it's also that comradeship was defined by warrior ethics. And so there's a psalm, love your neighbor, love your friend, and hate your enemy. Well, there's no hate in this. This is all about loving one another, and then that gets extended. And so this is the very fact that this story gets told by storytellers reciting John is an extension then of that love for everyone. Anyone who hears this story, it's addressed directly to them. And it is dealing with, the major problem that people will get hurt, offended, come to hate one another. Jesus' command, love one another.
Right.
So,
right. Yep, absolutely.
Not a recommendation. It's not a statement or something. It's a command.
Command, yeah.
I think that's what he recognizes,
Okay, so another thing Jesus says is, well, in the course of this discussion, or not discussion, his talk, he makes distinction, it seems, between a servant and a friend.
Yeah.
Where does that come from, or what's the significance of that distinction?
In the Roman Empire, between 40 and 50% of people were slaves. And the word that is translated servant here also means slave. Now, they weren't, he hadn't called them slaves, called them servants. But there's no place earlier in the gospel where he calls them servants. But this is in that context, that I have called you servants, that is, as subordinates to a teacher. I don't call you that anymore because you know everything that I know. And so I've passed it all on to you. Whereas a servant doesn't know everything that the master is thinking. It's a more distant relationship. This is a relationship of intimacy and of mutual knowledge.
Okay, so another thing is that, actually, this is another translation question. You said at the end, look at this again. I appointed you to go and bear fruit. And sometimes I think it says I ordained you.
That's the translation in the King James.
Okay. You want to talk about that difference a little bit?
Well, the ordained is a category that primarily is used in relation to ordination of clergy. And so that isn't what Jesus means here. He's not ordaining them as priests, ministers. He's appointing them. He's passing on his spirit to them.
Okay.
And giving them his authority.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so again, towards the end here, well, right after that, and what he's appointing them to do is to bear fruit. And then he makes this statement that a lot of us find problematic, which is, whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. And I'm not the only one who's had the question, I keep praying for this and, it doesn't happen, or, it's so, if what we pray for, if what we ask for in the Father's name, we don't seem to receive, is that because we're not worthy, or is it because Jesus didn't know what he was talking about, made a promise he couldn't keep? How do you help us understand that?
Right. Well, I remember a conversation that I had with my spiritual director. And I was saying to him that Mike Brophy, who will live forever in my honor and love, he said, you can ask anything of God. Ask for what you want. Examine your heart and say what is on your heart. Say what you want, what you deeply desire. What's your deepest desire? And what I found was that I was hesitating to name what I really wanted because I felt either like I wasn't worthy or whatever. This is Jesus addressing us as a spiritual director. Ask for whatever you want in my name, and it will be done for you. Well, what if it doesn't happen, that you ask for something and you don't receive it? Well, the other thing to do in that time is to pay attention to the ways in which God may be responding to your question, to your request, but that it isn't exactly in the way that you formulated it. So it's also, this invitation to ask for whatever you want is also an invitation to pay attention to the way in which God responds, to the way in which things happen. And often it'll happen that, there's a new development, but you don't pay attention to it because it isn't what you asked for. And so I think part of this is, it's about a relationship of love in which you ask and receive and give, take, not always exactly in the terms that you wanted, but that it's important to pay attention to what's in your heart and to ask for what you want. And that there is this relationship then, that in some way God will respond.
Yeah.
That's what I make of it.
I think that's a good food for thought, good spiritual direction for us. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week and spend some time with these words of Jesus from the Gospel of John.
Yeah, I would say one final thing in regard to this. This is about the mutuality of love. And it's about the mutuality of love that exists between God and Jesus and us. And it's like an electric current that flows in all of those relationships. And so pay attention to that. I don't know, love one another.
Yeah. Love one another. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.